Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Week in Hospitality Marketing Live show number 354. I am your host, Lauren Gray, and thank you for joining us today. Of all things interesting, coming up to a new holiday, the next holiday, Memorial Day, the unofficial launch of summer campaigns and so forth. There's a lot in the news and a lot in our concerns operating-wise for hotels, restaurants, what have you, and that is the anticipated business level of what the summer represents, regardless and in spite of all of the other information, which we'll talk a little bit about in our news conversation today. We're going to be a busy summer, is most likelihood. Given pandemic levels, given infection rates, given gas prices, given cost of living, given inflation, given everything, given political environments and so forth, a lot of the need and the desire to go for travel is superseding the cost and the concerns of travel. And for that reason, we want to talk a little bit about the logistics of what that really means for us. It is showing up in newscasts coast to coast, domestically for the United States, for those of our international guests, and I'm sure it reflects in your local as well, that there is a labor crisis still in process for us. We've covered this on the live show many, many times historically between the great resignation of last October and September, of course, the great list of furloughs and reductions in businesses when we were under restrictions that we no longer have at this current time due to the pandemic. We never really recovered, and we actually went into the pandemic, as we discussed, already behind of what we needed. Our industry, in perspective, from a labor perspective, was already in, I wouldn't say crisis, but close to being crisis, if you don't not to overuse the term, related to labor and staffing abilities and so forth. We were already on the downside of that. We exacerbated that to a critical level with the loss of so many talented people within our industry having to basically relocate their jobs and their careers for lack of availability to the jobs that they had or ability to find another job in our industry. Now we're in the inversion of that, which is we are critically behind what we need. We're not able to get back the people that we lost. And for the people that we did still get to keep through that entire process, a lot of opportunities opened up for them. I'm seeing more and more stories from more and more people that I know within the industry that they are taking advantage of the chance that it is now a buyer's market, so to speak, in the sense of being a skilled labor and skilled resource that several companies are looking for you. I know our business from being a consulting and an agency is exceptionally high. I wouldn't say we're an agency because I'm always anti-agency, but our services, where they can't internalize somebody. They can't find a good candidate for what they're looking to have internally. Other third parties are dramatically expensive and in some ways exploitive as to the conditions of contract that they're requiring now compared to before, the amount that they're having to get paid to do things, because they're literally leveraging the fact that they know you can't find the people you need because they're having a hard time finding people themselves. So they can charge a lot more for what they offer compared to what they used to because they kind of have you over a barrel, so to speak. We fit in very nicely because we haven't changed our prices in years. And we do the work that you need and then step out when you no longer need us, which is very different than the contractual relationships of places. Again, not a sales pitch, but these are just value perspectives of what's going on. So in the efforts of a lot of businesses, yours potentially included, you're going out into the job market to find candidates to fill the roles that you need. And we're seeing that in the news. We're seeing so many places that are saying, I used to have 50 people this time of year. Instead, I can only have 5. I only can find 5. A lot of it has to do with the protocols that we put into place, the guidelines, as to bringing external resources of labor in internationally. The visa limitations, issuing limitations, work visa limitations, and so forth, have critically hit a lot of the seasonal locations, New England, Florida, California, a lot of the park areas and so forth that relied very heavily on getting a lot of that external labor resource temporarily that they needed and not having to sustain it afterwards. The more traditional resources as to labor locally just aren't there. Let's face it, a lot of high school, quasi now college, or going between the two or ending one and beginning another, whatever way you want to look at it, just aren't interested in the lower level jobs that are available for seasonal hospitality. to be blunt about it, nobody wants to be a server at a restaurant, albeit that they could easily because there's so many jobs available, when they can go over and do something differently that doesn't require as much work for a higher rate of pay, simply because those businesses are also looking for resources, labor resources. And it's a easier job or a better paying job for the amount of time that they're spending. And workload is a lot like water. It goes for the path of least resistance. And so it's easier to get to those jobs than it is to work harder, because it's not a career choice. A lot of times, hospitality in history has been about a matter of convenience. You get the job because that's the only job you can, quote, qualify with lack of experience. Through doing those jobs, like during high school and college and so forth, while you're doing other things, or you have only short windows of time that you can work, you build up slowly experience. That means that when the next time you look for a job, you can actually get a better opportunity because of the history of your experience. And so you get into that, doing it again. And then the bug bites you for those that follow and stay within the industry. They find that it is incredibly rewarding. They enjoy it for what they've learned. They've gotten better at it as they've got more experience with it. And it's a cycle that they involve with. And we've also talked about the fact that as an industry, we exploit that. We tend to pay very little, thinking that we give opportunities to people, and that's the trade-off. You get less for the fact we are not needing to have a basic experience for you. But when we've stranglehold that resource, that progression of timeline, that growth, that breadcrumbs of discovery, and now we need people that have the skill sets high and above, they don't have the history of working with our industry because we've staved that off. We've created an interruption in that process. And what we're finding is that anybody that we're looking for skills, oftentimes they don't have a hospitality specific skill set. We're settling for a related skill set, technology wise or service wise or software service wise or administration or operational wise. Look at revenue management teams and look at marketing teams and look at support teams and SaaS teams and so forth. They're really an ancillary relationship at best for a lot of them. And it's been a kind of a stopgap for some purpose of that, but it's not a full solution for it. So what am I saying from all this? Well, what's happening is, again, as operators, we're going out into the space and looking for people to come into our ranks of our organization. The problem is, and we've identified it in previous live shows, matter of fact, four shows ago, 351, we talked very specifically about the new HR and how HR has to be tied to marketing, which brings us to our topic today. And I'm sorry, this was such a long introduction to our topic, but I want to make sure there was a good groundwork for it. And the topic that we want to talk about today, is good, better, best. How well are you representing your work environment? We talked about skills and tool sets for HR and using and utilizing them to better show your availability for the positions that you have. That's a matter of function of marketing. That's going over and saying we're going to use these advertising tools in LinkedIn because we have a skill set that we think we can address in LinkedIn as a platform. We're going to use these tools in Google ad campaigns or Bing ad campaigns because we need that medium to get in front of people by the targeting that those platforms provide. But we didn't really strongly address, we did touch it, but we didn't strongly address the means of explaining what it is that you are. What kind of work culture do you have? What is the premise of your culture? How do you perceive your culture? And I'm using the word culture repetitively. It could be environment, work ethic, corporate mission. Unfortunately, we have over-stylized our descriptions of ourselves, never holding actually truth to it. Let me give you a prime example that is painfully recent. Companies that touted their family values, their work-life balance values, you're part of a team, a part of a family, literally reneged on that statement when they furloughed hundreds and thousands of people out of their ranks callously. I'm not going to go into the horror stories, but callously. Hey, sorry, no business, don't need you. We're trying to preserve our entity and we're letting you all go. So much for family values. A lot of companies, not a lot, unfortunately the reverse, the companies that didn't do that maintained a bond with their teams and a solidification of investment in those teams. And the teams responded by becoming even more loyal and more dedicated to what they were working with and the goals that the company saw themselves on. They weathered the storm of the impact of the pandemic, the hit on our industry, much, much better than the companies that, oh, hey, we're back to business again, come on back. And people are like, yeah, no, you lied. You didn't take care of us to say that you would. I know people in other companies that did get taken care of. All that family thing that you said we were, and one team, one dream, and all the other crap that you threw out there is not true. So I have no loyalty to you. That gets exacerbated to the history of what we are, whereas a culture where it was proudful to be with a company for a very long time, it's almost now perceived as a negative. And we talked about this in shows prior, that if you're with a company so long, what's wrong with you? You're not progressing. Yeah, you're moving up within that company, but if you're really as good as you think you are, or as good as you should be doing what you're doing, other companies should be poaching you away. You should be going to other companies that are offering you better chances. It's actually the antithesis of what it used to be like, which was, why are you hopping companies after only 5 years? What's wrong with you? Why did the company not keep you? Why didn't you want to stay with the company? What did you do wrong that they didn't want you to stay around? It's an inversion of the way it used to be. With that, going back to our message of good, better, best, how you portraying your culture. What are you doing as an operation to not just say, I have a position available, and marketing hopefully swooping in and helping you with the methodology of getting that opportunity out in public for people to find it so that they can apply and fill that role. But what are you doing to convey what you do, how you face it? There is plenty of companies, as I have as clients, that have astronomically high anniversaries. I have one that's in their 60th. There's others that are in their 20s. And these are a testament to their longevity, that they are good operational businesses, because so many businesses don't last that long, especially in our industry. Restaurants have a shelf life of 5 years on a good day. The actual failure rate of anything lasting over a year is in the upper 80 percentile, and it doesn't really come down for the first 2 to 3 years. Only after the 3-year threshold does it substantively drop, and at the 5-year threshold, if you're past the 5-year, it really drops. You get to 10, it's a pretty rare air for somebody place to be around that long as a restaurant. Hotels, a little different time scenario as to the impact of them, but still substantive in the sense of who owns it and who operates it is really what shifts and moves. But actual labor time at a company, even as a GM, I had about a 2.5 year cycle. Why? Because if I was doing so good at the hotel I was operating, either the company I was working for, who would have had other hotels, would want me in a bigger, better role, either corporate or a larger hotel, or another company saw that what I was producing at a quality level for the company I was working for and would solicit me to come work for them. It was expected. And yes, it was one of those things that people look, and it was not a negative on my resume that 2.5-ish years I was going to GM here, to GM here, and GM here. As long as I show a progression of growth in those transitions, it validated the transitions. That being said, as an organization, how are you conveying your support of what is now considered the norm in our industry? Meaning, I come to work for you. I've accepted what you have to offer, and we've come to terms with what you're going to compensate me for to take that offer. What are you doing to invest in me? What training are you making available to me out of the interest of my growth? Have you actually even solicited me as to what I envision my growth to be? And let me stop here and go to the caveat of, did you even ask me that in the interview? What's my goal? What's my roadmap, to take a current phrase, into my career? Do I see myself from where I am applying for? What do I see that as a progression to where I would like to end up at? And where in my reference of relationship of now and then does that happen? It's a useful tool in most interviews. If somebody comes in as an entry-level position, well, I want to run this place in 2 years. Good luck. Some circumstances, it's entirely possible. In restaurants, particularly, if you've shown great aptitude and capability and you're rewarded persistently, it is entirely possible, especially in chain restaurants, that you can be at some management level within that time frame. Matter of fact, even shorter in some circumstances. But with other institutions like hotels and so forth, That is a very overtly aggressive timeline, and that reflects negatively on the interview that you are unrealistic in your expectation. It also means that you potentially will do anything for advancement versus quality of what you're doing. It's always a red flag too. So if you're realistic and say by 5 years or 6 years or whatever, I see myself from here to there, and to be then the person that asks back to the company that's interviewing me, is that a realistic expectation within your organization? Or is that level that I'm looking to get to very much about a different criteria that I'm unaware of? Like, does it take 10 years of butt kissing to get there? Is it something that's always open to best performance, or is it kind of like seniority and tenure that gets me at that level? Because if it is, don't expect me to stay here long enough, once I will quickly find that out, for the whole duration. I'm not going to wait 5 years to find out that it's actually a 10-year program that I got to wait for. I would have found it out within a very short time after I started the company, just from my familiarization to how you operate. These are things that we talk about good, better, best on when it comes to representing your organization. It starts earlier than the interview process for potential candidates, but I'm giving you examples of the interview process with potential candidates to give you some sense of the progression of it. Anybody you talk with, once they get into your organization, will learn more about your organization than you intended, and in some ways more than you even know about your organization, because they have a different engagement and level of communication with people that you, in the superior organizational management role, don't get to experience as firsthand as the people that operate within that environment. What do I mean by this? If I hire a housekeeper or a houseman or a front desk agent or a food service person or anything, in less than a week, they will know in their organization they've been hired into who gets stuff done, who doesn't get it done, who's the person you go to when you want the real answer, who's going to smoke you on what you don't get, who's the nice guys, who's the people and girls, and who's the bad people and the girls. What department is in struggles, who's in what struggling, who runs the place versus who thinks they run the place, and where do they fit in all of it? Happens in the first week. It modifies and changes over time depending on who they are. I mean, obviously they learn this, but are they willing to accept it, or are they themselves going to be the catalyst for change? That happens as time afterwards. But in a very short period of time, all of your "this is who we are" and sunshine and rainbows and unicorns frolicking through the field gets shifted into the reality. This happens in other ways that you actually control as the management person of this. And that is, what is your onboarding procedures? How do you maximize your first impression day? How do you maximize your investment in them to make sure that they're as qualified for the role you brought them in for that you can do for them, rather than throwing them to the wolves of, okay, here's your name badge. That's your supervisor. Good luck. We'll see you maybe whenever we cross paths again. I'm no longer involved in your daily life. That's kind of how it works out until all of a sudden HR has to walk back in because of disciplinary issues and or performance, and maybe there's reward systems, but really that happens so more often than it should, and has always happened, and hasn't really changed much in our world and our society for hospitality. So bleak picture aside, what do we mean by better, good, better, best? Well, good is you're well-intended. You try to make sure that your job descriptions, which can be labeled differently, and opportunities and things like this, which we'll talk a little bit more about, are really detailed in the sense of not granular as in what I need, what I want, what I need, what I want, what I expect, what I qualify as for this, as it is communicating what the job is. That's the key element compared to what you're looking for, is what is the position that you're looking for in a detail that's understandable. You don't have to talk about the pros and the cons, the goods, the bads. You have to be beyond the carry a certain weight, be on your feet a certain time kind of conversation, and more about you're the person that helps people doing this. You're the person that facilitates this. Your responsibilities are related to this in a way that's understood for somebody that may not have done the position before, especially if it's an entry-level position. We call them line positions. The other is the value of what you're offering for someone taking on that role. What is it that you do to help them, whether it's the opportunities for advancement, the benefits associated with the position, the compensation for the position, the inclusion to what department they are in, inclusion to what property they would be at, inclusion to the company that oversees that. That willingness to share the spectrum of what it is that they're joining is the second thing that has to be brought into the conversation. The last thing that gets brought into these conversations is what you need, your qualifications. It is the least valuable component to your discussion. Saying I need 3 years minimum experience, 2 years of continued education, Certifications are important. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying not to say these things. They're the least important things, unless it comes to the fact that not just anybody can apply. So to make it to not waste anybody else's time to apply for a job that they wouldn't qualify for because there's a certification requirement, like an engineering certification or something like that, then by all means, make sure it's in the context of the first two pieces. One is, this is what the job does, and the certification required to facilitate those things is a place where you put it. And also when you talk about the culture and the community that they're joining, that this certification entitles you to a respect level for the role that you play, because it takes an additional amount of understanding and confirmation that you are in that role for the reason that you are. Those fit into those discussions very easily. So the third and final most important thing about what it is you're looking for, it's only really just an echo to the first two. It's not the first place that they see this. But you do need to make sure they're included, because from a legal point of view, you don't want to be misinterpreted and or not clear, where you just say, well, we're not going to talk about the fact that you need to be on the feet for 6 hours, and then somebody applies and they're not capable of doing that. You don't take them for the role, and then they pursue you in return for not having made clear to them that they didn't qualify for something you didn't tell them they needed to qualify with. So it's not an unimportant section. It's just, out of the other things, the other two items, it is the least important thing. Which brings us to verbiage that you use and the means that you explain yourself for. What words do you use? If you're very factual, functional, and just getting through it to say it's said, is one of the worst ways of doing this, because you yourself are not showing the value of this role in the organization. You're not demonstrating that by not having somebody in the role, which is why you're looking for someone in the role, it influences all these people. How you help other people, how you support other people, how other people support you. How do you involve yourself and integrate with others? What is your role with them? What is the value and the authority you have in relationship to them? These things have to be in the dialogue of what you present. Again, it is not about what you're looking for. It's about explaining what it is that you have. This is where most of that conversation content comes from. And you need to tailor how you say what you say in relationship to the proposition of the level of responsibility that they have. You don't want to saturate it with buzzwords and cotton candy overuse of adjectives and so forth to make it sound something that it isn't. We all make jokes about what used to be a janitor is now a sanitation engineer and things like this. It's a softening of a title. And title changes are fine, but they have to be understandable. I often laugh when I see, and I'm not trying to pick on certain companies, so it's hard to give examples without being definitively, but calling yourself the chief whatever officer when you're not either, or the main thinking person as your title, it's cute. It's not relevant. It's not accurate. And it has certainly no relevance to understanding, do I go to you for this versus this, or is that what you do, or is it just, well, how do you fit? What responsibilities do I have to go to you for? So calling your room attendants chief happy people, say it in a meeting with them. Talk about that you're the people that make the world happy. You're the ones that make people happy. Think of yourself as a chief happy person. It's all good. But for the position role, it has to be understood what they're applying for. Calling it chief happy people gives no reference point for them. Internally, people may understand because you use the phrase internally a lot. Externally, when you're looking for other resources, referring it to something that isn't applicable to an understanding outside of your organizational environment is wasting your money and your time putting it in front of people, because it's not understood in the context that is provided. It might be cute, may make it smile, but I still understand what I'm applying for. And that also goes to the fact that you need to recognize the achievements of the people that you hope will be coming in by acknowledging the value you place on certain achievements. What do I mean by that? If I went and got a certification, say from HSMAI, like I have the chief, where is it? Over that way. The CHDM. Okay. That means I had to go over and go through testing and complete a level of testing that showed I had an aptitude and understanding of it, so I could use that term behind what I am. Obviously, I'm applying for a position for hospitality marketing. In comparison to somebody that doesn't have it, I have a leg to point to and says, hey, I did this. It shows that I have a dedication and an investment in what I'm applying for. You, as the person looking for positions and roles, before I even apply, should acknowledge the fact that you appreciate people that did this. What that means is I will magnate to people or positions that acknowledge that they're willing to know that this is worth noting as a value to what I can offer them. It's literally a calling card, much like social groups are. Similar interest, similar gathering. If you're saying you acknowledge what this is rather than me having to go into an interview, so what is this CHDM thing? Automatically, as an applicant, I'm looking going, okay, I'm being interviewed by a person that doesn't actually know what I'm bringing as assets to this conversation. So they don't know how to measure me against somebody else that may not have done what I've done for myself, number one. Number two, it diminishes my respect for the role that I'm applying for if they don't understand that I do understand it so much better having gone through a process like this. And the third is, if I don't get the position, I'm not going to think that it wasn't in fact part due to the fact that they had no idea what this value represented to somebody else. So acknowledging the accomplishments of the people that are willing to apply is a value proposition that you negotiate. If they're interested enough to go through the interview and they're interested to join your team, then you can negotiate the fact of what value does that represent in the compensation you're offering them. But that's an advanced conversation with someone, not an entry conversation. So how you control the entry conversation is to make sure that you're aware of all the things that could influence the accomplishments of somebody applying for a role. You translate that easily by saying experience. You know, if I walk in and say, I've been a housekeeper for 5 years, that's a lot more powerful of a statement than somebody says, well, I've never done the position, but I'm willing to learn. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily better. I could have 5 years of being a crappy worker, but at least somebody paid me to do it. But it does mean I'm probably able to be trained more specific to how you do it than trained as to what gets done and why it's valuable and all this stuff. And the second of it is, it means that I already know how the function of my role works within the infrastructure of the business the property I would be in. So it has that. Now, this is mainly when we've been talking about line positions. I'd like to talk briefly about what we call skill positions. And again, in previous shows when I've talked about these contexts, it's not one being better than the other. It's the qualification of being able to do one versus the other. Being a line position, having skill set is incredibly valuable and is a key component to anybody's success in their role. The variance between calling a skill set versus a line position is a skill set is because it usually requires management supervisory collaboration. You're involved with overseeing more things than a line position would be. A lot like if a restaurant were to be looked at the same way, a shift manager is a skill position compared to a server, because a server is about what their station is and what they're doing, delivering and taking orders and so forth, compared to a shift manager, which is worried about them and everyone else in that role, plus also the kitchen and in their individuals in their role, bartenders included, blah, 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 everything else. So because of that, this is leveled as a skilled position because there's related skills necessary to do those multiplicities compared to a line position, which is a specific to a particular service and project and type. So with that in mind, the skilled level positions, there's even more of an opportunity to elaborate on what you're looking for in your organization for that role. You're able to talk more about all the things that you are investing in and the value you place on that position, and also the things that you are looking for people to join, because they have a stronger, larger influence on your culture and your community of your organization than a line position. And I'm saying this only from the role of responsibility and authority. A line position, one single person can dramatically affect a culture at a property. They can be toxic to it, or they can be the most brilliant ray of sunshine to it. One person has a massive effect on any organization. It can be amplified based on the level of responsibility a person has as to the authority that they have by position and title. Leadership is the deference to following someone because you want them to tell you what they need you to do. Management is the authoritative use of a title to force or dictate to people what needs to get done. Because of that, they need to go over and be tempered with what you're sharing with them in such a way that they can be really understanding what they're joining, how they're joining it, what it is that they're participating in. And it's critical that you define your goals to being the best that you can be with them, because they have such an amplified impact on your community and your culture and your business. So for that reason, the value proposition of not just being good at what you're doing in how you share, but also tailoring what you're sharing to the channel that you're sharing it on. A LinkedIn content piece, a LinkedIn discussion is reflected not just in the fact that you're looking for a role, but they're going to research you. And as a company, do you share and do you have great things that have been shared about you? Because of that, then they will understand more about your culture before they actually was trying to reach out to take a role. They're going to do their research about you. I mean, we face that in business when people want to stay at our hotels. We face that in business when people, before they come to our restaurants. It is no different for somebody to research us once the connection has been made that we are open for a position and whether they're interested in soliciting to see if they want the position. And we misconstrued early on that it was about money. It is about money. It's never not about money, but it's not only about money. It's about what do they want to join. We have many stories that we see in the news where people join an organization that wasn't the highest offer of hourly rate or salaries or what have you, but they felt more connected to the organization because what they discovered about it or what they discovered in the interview process that made them feel that it was more to their well-being of life, their value of what they find to be important to join your organization compared to another's organization because of what was shared. By the same token, if you're putting things only on ads are action items. You can't explain everything in an ad. You can only solicit an action from the ad that brings them to a place because they've seen enough to know that they want to know more. That action brings them to a place that you can then be broader in all these things that we're talking about. But the verbiage you use is really contingent upon the platform that you have. If you're bringing them to a job-only application with no warm up as to all the things that we just discussed, it's a little bit like we give the analogy of a nightclub bar, and not to be crude about this, but you're really just saying, hey, do you want to or not want to? You're not warming up to the, hey, I'm a nice person, let's get to be friends and we'll figure all that out afterwards. You're just out there to go for one function. That's a lot of what this is like by just driving them to an application place. Here's where we are. We're looking for this, and it's an ad. Okay, so you can put everything in it. And they're like, well, that looks interesting. Let me click that. Boom. Oh, fill this in. Wait a minute. I need to know more about you, know about your organization. And if they're still willing to do the legwork, then they got to go away from what you're asking them to do into things to find out more about who you are, what you are. You've literally pushed them away, hoping that they come back, even after you brought them up to your doorstep saying, we have something available for you. It is better to look at the workflow of this, the funnel, as it were, that says, let's say what we're looking for. Let's make sure that all the things we're represented on the platform that we're saying that on are about all the things we want them to become aware of us. And let's bring them to a place that shares that. And if that, at that point, makes it interesting enough for them to continue on, we make that conversion function, that fill this form in thing, available everywhere. Just like we talk about converting hotel stays and restaurant reservations, that ZMOD, the zero mode of transaction, is applicable to this. We don't know when they're willing to say, let me go over and apply, but we have to make sure it's available throughout the entire funnel of what we are presenting to them, but don't make it the only place they go to. I see so often this efforts from companies that are out for looking for people to fill positions. and it goes right to a fill this form out and we'll get back with you, or we'll let you know, or no details about which property, which position for which property, information about what we're offering and who we are and why it'd be so cool to work with us. Just fill in the form to contact us and we'll reach back to you. Okay. And then maybe the next version of it is, okay, instead of that, add your resume or your CV and a cover letter. Well, not a lot of positions, especially line positions, need a cover letter. It's about filling out the criteria relationship of I've done it this long and, you're close enough for me to apply and so forth. Give them the information that helps them get interested beyond just this fits what kind of I'm looking for. It's in the area I'm looking for or the position I'm looking for, what have you. Give them the additional information. And a lot of resistance comes from companies that say, well, wait a minute, I don't want to really do that because I don't want my competitors to know how much I'm paying these guys because they're just going to undercut me by raising it by 5 cents or something. If it was just by price, then, sure, maybe that's a thing. In all honesty, what makes it different, and we just discussed this, is people want to buy into what you're selling. They want to believe that what they're joining fits better than just the amount they make. Again, it goes back to I can get paid twice as much to a place that treats me like you do, okay? It's not worth it to me compared to going to a place that is half of what they're offering, but I'm treated with respect and kindness and investment into me and training that's available to me and opportunities that are available to me. And we're seeing it again, as I said, in the news. This is where these things are. It's not like I have a role and there's 10 people that want this role and I'll pick through it, which is our mentality that has always existed in our job postings. So, putting up a job saying, this is what I'm looking for, these are the qualifications, throw your name in the pile. And if you beat the other 9 out, I'll offer you a job and I'll pay you the minimum I need to, because if you don't like it, I got 9 other people I can go back to and offer them the role, then one of them is going to take it. Those days don't exist right now. And not that it was a good idea back then. It's even worse now. It's better to go over and expand what you're doing, use the words, the verbiage, and the stories, the way you do it. Obviously, in Twitter, you can't do a War and Peace novel. So if you're going to use Twitter as an engagement, be concise. If you're going to use LinkedIn, be business-esque. Be about all the things that are business related, your investment, your duration in the community, the duration of people that have worked with you, whatever those are the things that validate the discussion on that platform. If it's Google ads, the ad is about what will drive them to hit the button that brings them to a place that you can give more information like this for them to decide if they want to continue the dialogue with you by submitting what you're asking them to submit. If it's by word of mouth or phone calls or anything like that, then make sure that there is the information and the verbiage that fits it. You don't want to use superfragility on a platform that really doesn't apply to using such superlative words. Concise information is important when it's on a platform that concise information is used for. And these are the experts that, from a marketing perspective, that can help you with interpreting that kind of thing. Marketing has more of a role than just the function of distribution. It's the means of communication. And your marketing team, marketing people that I hope you listened to that from the 4 shows ago where we talked about bringing marketing into your HR strategies, that those people you can rely on to say, I need to make sure that we push this priority first before we ever get to the requirements and criteria that we need for it. That should be an ongoing conversation from our discussion 4 shows ago. So I believe we've quantified the levels of good, better, best as to what it is you need to present, the priorities you need to present, the content that you need to present, the context that you need to put the content in, and the progress, the funnel, the workflow that is required to make this a successful conversion. Because you are one of many people soliciting, very few people in your market or not, for a job that can be found elsewhere, even if it's even in an industry they're still interested in getting into. So the deck is stacked against you now, and you need to shine separately than everybody else that's going back to the old ways of them having done it the way they always used to do it. So that's our discussion, good, better, best. How well are you representing your work environment? The last part of our conversation today I want to catch into very quickly is, again, going into the summer, coming into Memorial Day weekend next week, is to really talk about how are the dollars affecting the mix. There's two interesting articles. One from Forbes, which is this is how rising energy prices will affect your next vacation. It's a little bit of an older article. It goes back to March when we weren't still impacted as heavily as we are now with the inflation rates that we're having now, gas prices that we're having now. But a lot of the other stuff is still as was then and just continued on farther, which was the inflationary things that were happening, the supply chain issues that are still happening, the cost of things which are still happening, and all of those are still progressively impacting decision making. But now that we're closer to the summertime, we have a little bit more accuracy to actual potentials on some things. And that's where the other article from MarketWatch.com comes in called Summer Travel Isn't Just Heating Up, It'll Be on Fire. More travelers are hitting the road this Memorial Day weekend, but will pay more for airfares and gas prices. I find it interesting how they're referring to things in the article themselves because they want it to be a positive for travel plans. And to our conversations these past few weeks, we are going to have, most likely, that's my disclaimer, a very busy summer. Is it going to be like it was last summer? Me personally, I feel there'll be a slight temperament to that. I'm not saying it can't be. Again, disclaimer. I'm thinking that in my perspective, it'll be slightly tempered. One, because it isn't the first time we're getting out from being in isolation and quarantine. It's a progression of more and more people beginning to feel safe enough to do it in spite of the ups and downs that COVID represented. There's a dulling of the edge for it. We just realized we have to live more with it. For those of us still concerned at that level, we take precautions for it. Those that aren't, we can't be thinking it's an us and them thing anymore. It's like we can only control ourselves to wear masks. And for people that don't choose to do it, we adjust ourselves accordingly. It's not as polaric in our social society relationships. We don't evil glare somebody with or without a mask. But that being said, there's still some concerns, but there are still people that are just they're absolutely fatigued on staying home, and they will do something. Now, on the other side of that, like we said, on the rubber band on the other end is the continued growing of costs of flights and so forth. And there's some very interesting statistics in the news coverage of this. One thing I found interesting in my local news down here in Southwest Florida was they referred to a stat, and I'm still digging for this, but I thought it fascinating the way they presented it. I'm going to go back to I sent an email asking where they pulled the number from. They said for every additional dollar you're spending for gas, it negatively impacts travel expenses outside of gas by a negative $1.63. So I found that fascinating. They referred to it that way. It's like, wow. So for every dollar I'm spending in gas for travel, the more every dollar is, the less I'll be spending on other things by $1.63. That is a very heavy impact because the other things outside of gas for drive market is accommodations, entertainment expenses, tickets to the park or whatever it is, and your food. So those are the three things that have to get hit. But we already know that from our hotel strategy, we're not slacking on rates. So if they want to end up being in our market, I'm sure we're keeping rate consistency with our market. Okay. So it's unlikely they're going to be able to make much savings off of that. Of course, that's a revenue strategy for people if there's gap points in your occupancy and you're willing to flutter your rates, you could probably grab up some quick, short-term, hey, they can drive, let's make it. And we talked about radiuses modifying for drive travel based on cost factors of how far they go and how many days it takes and what's their total vacation time. We got geeked out about the data last week. But the other that means that the other two things are influencing, which is entertainment expenses. Well, no park is lowering the prices. If anything, we've heard notifications of how many of the nationally recognized parks are actually raising their prices. The Disney Worlds on the Universal Studios and so forth. The third is restaurants. Okay. Well, we know that restaurants are almost at where their whole menu is based on market price because of supply chain issues, cost of food, and everything else. So all the other things that technically have to get sacrificed for the increased gas price adjustment aren't in themselves any gap points. So what are the variables to those other three things? Because gas is going to be gas. Yes, you might be able to change it by a nickel or a cent, but it's going to be a certain price level regardless of how industrious you are using Gas Buddy. Well, restaurants. Immediately, there's a criteria shift as to how much you're willing to spend per meal period. The average is $19 per person, $48 for a family. So, family two, just so you know. So with that, you would lower your average cost for that. There's two ways of doing that. And that is you bring more food with you, so you don't go out as often. Or when you go out, you go to lesser expensive places, quote, quasi fast food and or food trucky and or other things that have a high ticket per head place, which means that's one way of saving that fraction of it. The other is from a park's perspective. If you're dedicated to going to the park because that is a function of your trip, you're going to have to pay whatever it takes to pay there. But your duration of being there, which would affect your price of your ticket, would mean you look for other things to do because you can't spend the full amount of time in the park as you had planned. So to make the trip worthwhile, you might reduce your time in the park, which reduces your ticket price, and find alternative lesser cost for entertainment aspects around it, so as to margin yourself off of that. And this is the extreme sense of this, you change your entertainment plans that you just don't go to the expensive park and you find things ancillary around that park. We know for a fact that parks drive business, not just to themselves, but they radiate from the park in a very large way. So a lot of stuff around these parks may be the benefit of all of this, because even though they're expensive or have raised their rates, it's still cheaper than the main park that they are around. And the same goes for hotels. They might step down a tier or two into what they get as accommodations to help compensate for the gas prices we just talked about and fit themselves into their budget. Because there's two quantified things, one certain, the other is moderately modifiable. The duration of the vacation is defined by their work. That's usually very finite as to what they're capable of doing. And then the second thing is the amount of money that they're willing to spend or capable of spending on that vacation. And we talked last week in episode show number 353 about alternative forms of payment, deferred, point of sale transaction payments, and so forth. And that has variabilities as to how much willingness people will get into debt to have their vacation. And that's a variable that also has to get considered into this impact. So I find the articles very interesting. Of course, they're in the show notes. I welcome you to see those as well. I'll be doing a podcast that will recap this, our audio podcast we do right after the show, which will have this. It's also going to have some fun tools about how to go over and create an excellent, discovery call. And for those who aren't in my industry, but are in any discussion when they talk with vendors, how can you accelerate the dialogue to be more efficient and valuable, even if it's your first call? Because it's usually, as a discovery call by its very name, is we're trying to learn about each other, but being as fully educated as you can for the resources that are available. And we will have tools we'll talk about in the podcast as to tools that can help you get up to speed, so you're not asking naive questions, which slows down the productivity of the meeting that you're having with people. That would be a huge thing. And that's where we're going to have the conversation on the podcast, is how to start a discovery call right, the research that works. And we're going to talk about some of the tools for that. And of course, we'll recap our live show here on the Good, Better, Best, how you're representing your work environment. So remember, you can watch us always. We simulcast always on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. We also go over and are on a TV channel, Hospitality Channel, which you can find on your Roku, your Apple Plus, your Amazon Prime, Fire Sticks, Google TV, also on your Apple iOS platform and on Android platform. You can find us on your tablets and your phones and everything else like that. But again, on your TVs, you can find us. Just look for the Hospitality Channel. It is a channel. Live show is always on the free side of that. And for those that live around the world, that we broadcast to 39 plus countries that we have known representation in, we translate this in 11 languages, but we also recast this show at 11:30 a.m. Sydney on Wednesdays, Sydney, Australia, 11:30 a.m. London for EU times, so that it fits into your time schedule a little bit easier. So with that, my name is Loren Gray. Thank you for the privilege of your time, and we do look forward to talking to you next week.